Welcome to the new P10 Torque Factor podcast, and I'm your host, Scott Brown, a show discussing all things moving the service industry forward, focusing on expanding knowledge and awareness around tools, equipment, education, and industry trends. Today's featured guest is Peter Coll, who will be talking about Refrigerant 1234yf. We'll also have Donnie Cipher with a NASDAQ update, and Steve Ford, aka the Car Guy, with some insight on education for the automotive service trade. This episode is brought to you in part by VehicleServicePros.com is a trusted online resource for vehicle service and repair information, fleet maintenance management, and the latest products for servicing America's fleet of vehicles. It's the official website of professional tool and equipment news, fleet maintenance, and professional distributor magazines. VehicleServicePros.com is on the pulse of the industry, sharing new technology, the latest product information, and market trends to keep our readers in the know-how. Okay, we're talking recalls now. GM recently issued a fairly significant recall in September of 2019 involving 3.4 million vehicles. These are primarily the truck SUV platforms, including the 2015 to 17 Escalade, 2014 to 18 Sierra Silverado, 2015 to 18 Suburban, and 2015 to 18 Yukon/Tahoe. Recall number 19V as in Victor -645. Basically what's happening here is that the engine-driven vacuum pump for the power brake system is failing due to lack of oiling. This can be linked back to lack of proper maintenance. There is an oil screen for the lube circuit on this particular pump that typically gets plugged up and causes the pump to actually break apart inside. I have seen this here in our shop, and basically what GM has done is that they've come up with a software update for the electronic braking control module that will provide additional braking assistance if the power brake booster vacuum levels drop below a certain level. GM is not issuing any repairs to the pumps themselves, so you may want to be on the lookout for this and inform your customers that proper maintenance can lead to extended life. You can check up on all recalls at the NHTSA website, nhtsa.gov. All right, next up we've got an item related to automatic emergency braking with 2017 to 2018 Nissan Rogues. There is a voluntary recall and a TSB. The voluntary recall is NTB19, so that's November Tango Bravo 19-064B as in Bravo. They've got an issue with false activation of the automatic emergency braking system, and basically what they are going to do is check and reprogram the laser radar module and also the ICC or Intelligent Cruise Control /ADAS module. They've issued software updates to correct for this. So that was issued on the 20th of September 2019. So if you get those vehicles in your shop, it's a good idea to run that VIN number through the NHTSA website to see what is open. All right, next up is a case study. And for this one, this was a vehicle that we had in our shop. And you can read up on all of the details on Diagnostic Network. The vehicle was a 2001 Chevrolet Suburban that was towed in. And the customer basically reported to us that for many months now, the ECMB fuse at the underhood distribution center fuse block was blowing, and he'll just drive along and the car will shut off, and he'll get out and pull that fuse out, put another one in it, and you can drive off for a little while. He's had it into multiple shops and has had all kinds of work done to it. When we got it in, we started doing a preliminary inspection, and if you're looking at the web version of this, you'll see all of the imaging as I walk through this. You'll see that there's been a lot of wiring that's been added, a bunch of upgrades on the lighting system and whatnot. And we know that in some cases, this could likely be an induced problem. Well, we started looking around and isolating the circuits feeding that fuse feeds, and we couldn't see any correlation between the add-on wiring and this particular system. So basically what I wanted to do is get a current probe on a fuse loop in the PDC. And what we did find is that we were monitoring it. We could see a lot of noise. We shut the car off, and then when I went to restart it, it actually blew the fuse and failed to restart. I went back to the scope and I saw the huge spike, and I thought, oh, there's got to be something going on. It looks like related to the fuel pump, perhaps. So what we did is we put another fuse in it, and we fired it up. In this image right here, we're looking at a zoomed in piece there. But what we did is we fired it up, had it running, and I got underneath the vehicle with a rubber mallet, started tapping on the fuel tank. And you can see the corresponding spikes from each of my taps. So at this point, we told the customer that we have high confidence that the problem is inside the tank, and he gave us approval to go ahead and take it apart. And when we dropped the tank out and pulled the pump out, this is what we found. The power lead, the two main power leads, the power and ground for the fuel pump, appear to have gotten so hot that they semi-fused themselves together, causing an intermittent connection, or an intermittent short. And this is typically induced by poor terminal contact. So poor terminal contact leads to excessive resistance, which creates a lot of heat, and it ended up melting the wires. So we ended up, selling a new GM pump, and we replaced all the wiring terminals so that we had everything, terminated and set up properly. But the point here is that when you've got an intermittent problem like this, connect a fuse loop, use your scope, put it on a slow sweep, and start manipulating the circuit, and take a look at the scope and see what you can find. So I hope that this case study can help somebody out someday and help them solve intermittent problems. Now, if your professional responsibilities include anything to do with mobile air conditioning, you're going to want to have a listen to my next guest, Peter Coll, who is the Vice President of Neutronics. And if you haven't heard of Neutronics, no worries. Their refrigerant analyzer or identifier can be found in almost every AC recovery machine on the market today. Peter has been with the company for nearly 23 years, and I consider him to be a subject matter expert when it comes to everything mobile air conditioning. Please join me for a recent discussion I had with Peter exploring everything to do with 1234yf and everything in between. First question that I have is on the 1234yf. Can you give me a little bit of background on that, and then let us know how this is impacting the market and how are the OEMs migrating to the new refrigerant?
Sure. So everyone always asks us, why do we have this new refrigerant? And the real short version is because the European community decided that 134A was causing global warming, and therefore they wanted to look at changing refrigerants. And that's a little different than what we had in 1994, 93, when we switched from R12 to 134A. That was about ozone depletion. So they made a rule back in 2006 that essentially said, effective with January 1st, 2011, you couldn't design a new car that would use 134A. If it was going to have a refrigerant system in it or an air conditioning system, that system had to have a refrigerant with a global warming potential of less than 150. So if we think back, that's quite a while. They gave them 5 years from when they made the rule, and then new vehicle platforms or new designs had to be designed with a new refrigerant. We went through a couple of different iterations with some challenges on flammability and so forth from Daimler. And the end result was January 1st of 2017, all the cars in Europe that were for sale on new vehicle lots, new cars, could not have 134A, so they all or virtually all of them had 1234yf. From a domestic standpoint, it's a global marketplace. And the EPA under the Obama administration latched on to the rules for Europe and said, hey, we're not going to force you to go to 1234yf, but we've got this big push on fuel economy, and it's not just fuel economy, it's emissions from the vehicle. So we're going to give you an opportunity to get some credits towards those fuel economy ratings or CAFE ratings if you use a low global warming refrigerant. And they looked at it and said, well, it's kind of like low-hanging fruit. Let's go ahead and look at switching the refrigerant, as well as any vehicles that they were to export to Europe would have to have that refrigerant anyway. So that led us to changing the refrigerant to 1234yf. And we saw the first cars were in 2012, Cadillacs, and have continued right through 2018 and now include every major vehicle manufacturer that produces cars, with the exception of Mazda. Mazda is the only one who currently is not using 1234yf, and that's because, one, they don't sell them in Europe, and secondly, their fuel economy is really good. So, I think you may know this better than I do, Scott, but roughly we sell 17 million new cars a year, something like that, I think.
That's correct.
And right now, about 80% of the cars sold here in the U.S. have 1234yf. So that's about 13.5 million cars a year are going out with 1234yf refrigerant. And because we started with small numbers in 2012 and then the Chrysler Group in 2013 and on to Chevrolet and so forth, there are currently about 40 million YF cars on the road in the U.S.
Wow, okay. Those are some great stats.
And that's where we stand today, about 40 million. When you kind of go back through the numbers, you'll see that about 12 million of those are outside of the manufacturer's warranty, either by time or mileage based on average use. That number will more than double by 2021. You'll have 25, 26 million by 2021 that'll be out of warranty. And 95, maybe even 100% of the vehicles by 2021 will be using 1234yf as their refrigerant.
Okay, that's excellent news because, like us in the aftermarket, I have an aftermarket independent shop here in Southern California, and we are not doing the 1234yf yet, but of course we are looking at purchasing that equipment. So for someone in my space, what do I need to know? I know I need to get educated, right? Or I need to get my technicians educated on this new refrigerant. What are the major differences coming from 134 to the 1234?
Well, from a service perspective, there really isn't much difference. You need an AC service machine certified to the appropriate SAE standard. You'll need a leak detector certified to the appropriate SAE standard. But the refrigerant operates at a pressure and temperature very similar to 134A. It is slightly flammable. You're going to have a slightly flammable refrigerant anytime you have something that has a low global warming potential, because you have a refrigerant now that is going to disappear from the atmosphere in roughly 11 days, which means it's pretty unstable. And anything unstable is what causes that little bit of flammability. But all the studying and so forth that was done by GM and Ford and SAE and others have determined that 1234yf is, if not the least flammable substance under the hood of the car, almost the least flammable substance. Far less flammable, obviously, than things like fuel, diesel, gasoline, oil, transmission fluid, power steering, brake fluid, etc. So from a servicing perspective, there's really not much difference. From an operational perspective of equipment, there are a few differences. 1234yf requires that we do a vacuum decay test. It requires that we identify the refrigerant prior to recovery. It requires us to do a 15% pressure charge to make sure that we're not leaking refrigerant into the passenger compartment through a leaky evaporator. All of those things are built into the machines today. but it does mean that you're looking at, maybe 20 minutes more service time than you were with 134A. But the connections, the systems are identical as far as the way the systems operate, the way you diagnose problems are all the same as 134A. So it's pretty easy transition for the service industry.
Okay. So you mentioned the 15% pressure charge and then test for a leaking evaporator. I take it that was mandated because of the flammability?
Yeah, it's mandated because we in the U.S. have the pleasure of living in the land of litigation, and they were concerned that in the event that you had a leak of some sort in the evaporator and you had some extraneous event occur, they didn't want to have a known buildup of refrigerant within the passenger compartment. So they require the machine to, as it's recharging, puts 15% of the refrigerant in. Then it asks you to take your certified leak detector to the passenger floor and confirm that the leak detector did not go off to indicate that there was a leak, and then allows you to continue the rest of the charge. And that's one of the items, along with the vacuum decay test and refrigerant identification, that contribute to the little bit of extra time it takes.
Excellent. Wow, that's some really good information where you just explained it in pretty simple terms, painted a pretty rational picture, and it doesn't seem like that big of a stretch to get tooled up. So on the tooling end of it, what do we need to look out for in the tooling? I know you mentioned earlier certification, but we've got also probably requirements for hybrid or electrified vehicles as well.
Yeah, the new SAE standards, SAE J2843 as well as J3030, cover the AC service machines suitable for 1234yf. And those standards prohibited the use of automatic oil injection. One of the reasons for that is because they're concerned that those machines are suitable for recovering refrigerant and charging refrigerant in the hybrids, but they didn't want the technician to leave the existing oil that was in the machine and accidentally put the wrong oil in a hybrid. And of course, if you put the wrong oil in a hybrid, you can run into some conductivity issues related to the case of the compressor. And those conductivity issues potentially could electrify the case and would not be a good situation. I frankly have never seen it happen. I'm told that it can happen. Maybe it has happened, but that's one of the differences in the standards from 134A to YF is removal of the ability to do automatic oil injection.
What does that mean? Does that mean that there's a manual process on oil adding into the system?
Yeah, all of the machines have a oil reclaim bottle, and machines these days and systems these days don't recover oil like they used to. You're typically getting very little oil, but what they want you to do is use a manual oil injector. Our suggestion, and I think the industry suggestion, is you should have one for hybrids and you should have one for your straight PAG oils that you're using, and manually re-inject however much oil you removed from the system during service. And it's a pretty simple process. The tools are mechanical. There's not a whole lot to it. Dealers kind of like it because then they can charge for cartridges. They charge for whatever a cartridge is for containing oil, whether it's an ounce or half an ounce or something like that. One of the other things to note, by the way, we were doing some testing and we came across some of the oil in one of the hybrids, and the oil was incredibly expensive. And by incredibly expensive, I'm talking north of $100 per ounce.
Wow.
For the hybrid oil for 1234yf. So you got to kind of keep that in mind, especially if you're servicing hybrids.
Yeah, can you tell me what hybrid or what manufacturer that was, or was that a universal across hybrids?
That was universal across hybrids. We happened to be working on a Chrysler Pacifica.
Okay.
And that Pacifica happened to be a hybrid. And we also happen to have a Toyota Prius. And they both use that same oil. That I think it's the ND11, I believe, oil.
Okay.
And we went to Toyota and we went to Ford and we went to GM or the local GM dealer here, as well as Chrysler, to try to get a hold of the oil. And we were able to get it. And I think that it was, if I remember right, it was $140 per ounce from the Ford dealer. So when they handed me a can that felt like it was empty. And in reality, there was an ounce of oil in there, but it was incredibly expensive. We ended up paying a little less than that. They gave us the wholesale price or something, but it was still $100 for an ounce of oil.
Wow. Okay.
And that becomes interesting because people complain about the price of 1234yf. Often one of the next questions we get is, what's this stuff cost? Well, it's really expensive. When you compare it to 134A, it's really expensive. And that causes some other challenges for a shop concerning how you charge for materials and so forth. You kind of have to adjust to that. I don't know what your shop does, but wouldn't be unusual, I would think, that a shop that might be paying $3 a pound for 134A might be charging it out at $20 a pound. But nobody really thinks much about that because the car takes a pound of refrigerant. When you take a refrigerant like 1234yf that's going to have a cost of $70 a pound, and you try to apply, 4 times or 5 times markup on that, that gets really expensive. So that's one of the surprises that anyone getting into 1234yf will face is the cost of a little 10-pound cylinder of refrigerant.
Yeah. And most of these 1234 systems don't hold a lot of refrigerant. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. The amount of refrigerant's getting smaller. That's a combination of a whole bunch of factors. Improved efficiency in the systems. They are more efficient these days. But just like anything else, the vehicle manufacturers only want to use what they have to use. So if I can get away with 8 or 10 ounces in a Mini Cooper, that's what I'm going to do. It's just less cost for the dealer or less cost for the manufacturer, and theoretically lower price to the customer. We're not sure that actually works out that way, but those systems are getting smaller.
Okay, great. Hey, that's a plethora of knowledge there that you just delivered in a very, very short time. I really appreciate that information. And, as we progress, down the road, I hope to get you back on this show so we can get some additional insight from you. Thank you for that.
Yeah. My pleasure, Scott. Before we go, I do want to mention one other thing that the SAE has a website, and the website is MacDB. That's MacDB.sae.org. And what that is that's a database of certified equipment. That's important because we know that sometimes we get equipment from other parts of the world that advertise they're suitable for a particular purpose, but have not been certified. And that means that those pieces of equipment, for example, a recovery piece of equipment that's supposed to get 95% of the refrigerant out in 30 minutes or less, hasn't been certified to do that, and maybe it only gets 80% of the refrigerant out. So anytime any of the listeners are looking for a piece of equipment to service any air conditioning, but particularly 1234yf, we suggest they make sure that what they're looking to buy is listed on that macdb.sae.org website.
Okay, cool. We'll make sure that we have that URL listed here in the notes so that users can use it as a reference. And that I anticipate that is a live updated list of certified components.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Great information. Yeah. The last thing a shop wants to do is purchase a piece of equipment that just isn't up for the task and delivering disservice to the client. The folks listening to this are all professionals, and I'm sure that they're looking to do the best possible job that they possibly can. So again, Peter, I really appreciate you being on the call, and thanks for your support.
Oh, Scott, it's my pleasure. We look forward to seeing you soon, and hope you guys have a great day.
Now, a word from our program sponsor. Now, I recently started using the Yellow Jacket Man-Tooth Wireless Manifold by Ritchie Engineering Company, and I have to say this is quite an awesome product. If you're servicing AC systems, you'll want to check this tool out since it can provide you with valuable performance information about the refrigeration system in very short order. The kit comes with 2 wireless pressure transducers that work with both R-1234A and 1234yf. There are 2 temperature sensors that provide both high-side evaporator inlet and compressor low-side inlet temps. Once the mobile app is properly configured, the unit can provide you with a live enthalpy chart, which is a thermodynamic visual measurement that plots out the refrigeration system performance. Couple that with your scan tool for most late model vehicles, and you have one dynamite HVAC diagnostic tool set. You can find more information about the Ritchie Engineering Man-Tooth Wireless Manifold AC Service products and other products in the show notes. All right, and we're shifting gears into the industry news segment. We've got Donnie Seifer, who's the Executive Officer of NASTF, the National Automotive Service Task Force, here to join us to talk with us about NASTF. Welcome, Donnie.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it.
All right, so moving along, I know that we've had some recent developments over the summer and the beginning of fall here. We've had a couple of issues with 2 of the domestic OEMs, and I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of insight as to what was actually going on there and what impact on service came to the surface, and then what has been done to help mitigate that.
Well, the first one, we had a challenge with Ford's IDS software. It was having major issues taking vehicles down during programmable module installation. And this was very out of character for Ford Motor Company to have a problem, for one, like this, but then secondarily, the amount of time it took to resolve it. And broadly, what I would say to people who are listening who aren't involved in this is that automakers are trying to redefine who they are. And in some cases, they're leaving the traditional things on the table that they've always supported, and they're moving people all around to take on different responsibilities. And then nobody got the memo that they needed to be involved in some of these other things. So the Ford issue affected both independent repairers as well as dealers. The dealers weren't as affected because they don't tend to be the ones working on the older vehicles. And that was where the problem was occurring, and it was a software flaw. And I don't have the exact count, but it was over 40 days that some of these vehicles were down. And it came down to the communication channels that we have traditionally used had all kind of changed over at Ford, and the right people were not getting the messages. That subsequently has been fixed. Software has been fixed. But we had at NASTF 13 service information requests. And at one point, by my count, I knew of at least 30 cars that were broken in the U.S. and Canada that simply couldn't run, some of which unfortunately came in running. So that really hurts when you're the repairer. And we're down in some cases for days, if not weeks. So I'm hoping that this is not a pattern going forward with some of the issues that have been coming to the table with these really big applications where they can break something because the application's been around so long. And that may have been some of the reasoning behind so many of the OEs building when the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, became active back in April of 2018 as far as, being able to use the J2534 interface and a piece of software on a PC. I think that maybe some of that decision to make those new standalone programs was to not have to support so many different network schemes and different ECU schemes. And hopefully this won't be an ongoing issue, but that definitely got everybody's attention, and it was unfortunate.
Yeah. So, and just to expand on that just a little bit here. So, Ford, it affected some of the older vehicles, of course, that don't visit the dealerships. So they really didn't have a good look at what was going on there. So what came out of the lack or the deficiency that Ford had? Did we improve those communications and help them understand how to get in front of this or listen to what's going on in the marketplace, either through NASTF or other channels?
Absolutely. We actually spent more time doing that than we did fixing the software. Once the right people knew what to do, they had a solution pushed out. I mean, it was a Thursday, and on Friday morning, I got an email. It's fixed. Get everybody to try this out. We've already proven it. So interestingly enough, the aftermarket was involved in the solution. the aftermarket was doing the testing for Ford at their behest to make sure that this worked, and before they even pushed it out. So that piece has been happening behind the scenes for those who don't know that. That there are many aftermarket, let's call them experts in brands, that the automakers reach out to and say, hey, test this for us or help us with that, or can you get one of these cars captive so we can try it? And that's really what the advantage was there. But the other thing that happened was the chain of communication that we had with that automaker has now been stripped down to just copy in the chain that this is the person that you go to. And I've had those, and my predecessor, Skip, had those really nailed down for a long time. But lately, there have been so many changes at automakers that, boy, the ball just gets dropped. So Ford Motor Company has fixed it. Their compliance person that I worked with in my past, who's in Washington, D.C., she took the ball and ran with this thing and had things going really within 48 hours. So I just went to a different channel, and that's, unfortunately, sometimes that's what you have to do. The one that you're talking in and there's nobody paying attention, you have to go to a different channel. And so, so we learned that we needed to fix that communication channel, but also that, there are other folks who are able to help. And that's always been part of my game plan. Is a lot of times I'll go outside of that traditional, I'm going to the guy who designed the scan tool, because their bandwidth is so taken up that sometimes they don't even notice.
Yeah, that's awesome, because the big part here is that they're listening, right? They want to help, they want to make it work. But the other big piece here that I heard you say is that you've got subject matter experts in the aftermarket that we're helping to move towards the solution as well. And that's really important. If you really think about, the average age of a vehicle now is, close to 12 years. That means that curve there, that's 24 years of vehicles out there that have a lot of modules and a lot of controllers that are going to continue to need service. And of course, the OEM is really it's not in their wheelhouse, but to have these other experts out there that can help us all understand what's going on, kudos to them to help the industry continue to move forward. So thank you.
Yeah, and you will never hear about who they are because they all do it completely anonymously. And so for those who will know who they are, thank you, because, I get a text message saying, don't worry, I'm testing it right now. I'll get back to you as soon as I know. And, that's really nice because it lets me know that there is some action, even though sometimes it's just something you can't see. It's not transparent.
Yeah, and it's not an easy task because, again, you need vehicles that actually need to have a particular service done, right? You need to have a programming operation that needs to be done. So that's kind of hard to test without having a vehicle in need. So, yeah, that's great. And I think that we will continue to build those relationships and hopefully the OEMs will see the value in who we are and what we do in the industry. So again, the folks that are in the anonymous mode, thank you very much, and I probably know several of them as you do too. There was another domestic OEM that had some things going on recently. Was that GM that had some things going on with their website design and access?
Oh, yeah. So they did a major redesign, which was much needed. And but they did a major redesign at their website, which allowed them to embrace something other than Internet Explorer, which is, a blessing since that's a retired piece of software that our industry is still having to use very actively, despite the cybersecurity risks that it brings to the table. So they went through a rather painful process of bringing their folks over, and it was much the same as what we experienced with SDRM when we moved the VSPs over. There was a very large percentage that never read the emails and were operating business as usual, and then when they went in to use it, all of a sudden they found out, oh, heck, I can't use this anymore. And GM experienced much of the same thing and had a complete overrun of their support for a little while. One of the really great things about them, however, is they try to pregame this stuff. And whenever possible, they will push out a notice to NASDAQ, and then I push it out through all the communication channels that I have, our website and IATN and the Diagnostic Network, and anywhere that I can put it. I've stopped putting it on Facebook because it doesn't get any hits, but all of that information getting out a little earlier, and I've really encouraged the automakers, if you know something's going to happen, tell me in advance. I mean, effectively, even though there's lots of repeats, I can see 250,000 eyes really fast. And, your information can get out there before and maybe stave off some of this chaos. So, yeah, they had some fun with that. And they were expecting it because they were obviously involved with the SDRM changeover as well. So they were expecting it. But we just don't have a perfect solution to do these types of releases because so many folks, email is just something they use occasionally, and we're not really set up to be able to text them. And a lot of them don't read the posts that come from, the magazines, and we do press releases and that sort of thing because they're not in their email either. So, one of the things that we've suggested is when a website offers and asks you to send you notifications, if it's mission critical, you should let it send you notifications. Let the website say, hey, this is going on. Did you know that? Because that's an easy way to be communicated with ad hoc when it needs to happen without looking at email if that's not something you do.
Right. If it's a critical business function, yeah, that totally makes sense. And I agree. I see the same thing happen, with you can email people all day long and nobody's reading their email. But, in this day and age, this is a critical part of your business operation. You go back to, when Mark Saxenberg was championing the service ready, right? So everybody's gotten service ready now, and they've really kicked it up. But the key now is to stay service ready. Don't wait until you need to use that piece of equipment only to find out that now you're deficient because you didn't pay attention to the emails or what have you. So yeah, in this day and age, you cannot wait for information to come to you. You need to kind of go out of your way and bring that information in and make it highly visible so that you can increase your your situational awareness so you don't get caught behind the eight ball and have a 45-minute job turn into 3 hours because your computer's Java or whatever is not configured right or what have you. So communications and computer systems, they're part of our life, a part of our world, and it is so important to stay on top of all of that stuff. So GM is running smoothly or smoother now, I take it?
I've had no complaints with any of their processes lately. And they're really, in my view and from where I sit, they're one of the companies that really has what I call a very high level of give a damn. They are responsive to what people say. I know a lot of folks don't necessarily like some of the policies they put in place, but if they understood the background or put themselves in General Motors' shoes for a little bit and looked at liability and theft and cyber issues, they would see that they really don't have a choice. They're forced into some of these policies that they embrace, and others will come along. But when you're one of the big ones and you've got, theoretically deep pockets, that's who people are going to go after when there's, litigation. So I think they do a really good job of being responsive, and their support line is as good or better than anybody in the industry.
Yeah, and I think you had a key word there. I think folks don't quite understand the situation that the manufacturer is in, and it's a big world out there. There's a lot of dynamics changing, a lot of crazy things happening that you would not even think of, as a service professional. But there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and they're having to shift gears and make changes to help mitigate some of these challenges that now come up, and this is why we have some of these systems in place. But like we talked about earlier, the VSP, gaining that credential, I think is going to help folks stay service ready as well because of some of the other security things that we talked about. So where can people find out more about the Vehicle Security Professional and NASTAF?
Well, the best thing for right now, our existing NASDAQ website, which is about to have a major overhaul. We expect by the first of the year to have tested everything and have it up and running. But right now, NASTAF.org, which is National Automotive Service Task Force, NASTF.org, has got a vehicle security page as well as all of our other information. The site's old and it's very texty, but there's a lot of information on there. And vehicle security page is just sort of a first blush of what our new website will look like. Even it's in an outdated format, so the new version of that looks pretty cool. I got to play with it yesterday. But you can learn, what do I need to do to become a VSP, and what documentation and what does that documentation need to look like, and all of that kind of stuff, because that's where most folks run into their challenges. Is we have had so many bad actors try to get into the system that what we've learned is generally they can't really prove they're in business because they're not really in business. And so we've had to really up our game on the business documentation. And we really had to up our game on the insurance documentation, because that's another area where there's a considerable amount of fraud coming in, and also where coverages aren't good. And I don't want somebody to lose their business because they're not covered right, when we're looking at this stuff every single day, and we look at a particular VSP will submit a set of insurance documents, and like, you're not covered here. You understand that, right? If something happens, you've got no coverage. And, and they get upset with us, and it's like, you can get upset with us, but I think we could have just saved your life. We've had people lose their business, and that's just not right. And so why not? We've got the knowledge to do this, so we'll tell them, hey, you need to get another policy. We've even had some insurance agents who come to the table and help us. And, we'll call up an agent where we know in a particular area and say, can you help? And they say, of course, we'll do it. Sometimes they don't even get the business, and they still help. So that part of it is challenging for some folks, but once you figure it out, you'll see it's really easy. We tried to make it really easy so that you can prove you're in business by going to your Secretary of State's website and just getting a statement of good standing. And there's only just a couple of states that actually require you to do anything beyond just asking for it and screen capturing it. So that's where they can get that. They can see all of the information about doing it. But one thing I want to add, Scott, is that this is something that you don't just do to do. Don't just sign up. I had one shop that signed up every single one of their techs. And I said, well, how many are you doing in a week? Oh, gosh, I don't think we've done one or two this year. I'm like, well, why would you sign up so many people? Set up somebody in your shop who, by the way, does not have to be a technician. Usually it's better that they're more computer savvy than that they are a technician, and have them be your security person. And then when you actually have one of these, let them start to become your knowledge base in the shop for how that stuff works. And then as you see more need, or as we get more scan tools that require authentication, as you see more need for that, then bring other employees on as sub-accounts, because, our goal is not to have you just spend your money. We want you to do it when it's actually going to make sense and you're going to have a return on that investment. And it's relatively inexpensive, $400 for 2 years, and sub-accounts are $200 for 2 years. So, you're not talking about any serious investment here, but at the same time, getting 4 of them and then having one person use it once every 6 months, that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as you were explaining that, I was playing back in my mind the landscape of the industry, right? And when I came into this industry in the very early '80s, went to work in an independent shop, and basically the staffing was service manager, you had a service writer, and then maybe you had an office person, and then you had technicians. Now we've got to have security folks. We've got to have some guys that maybe operate or make our IT systems operate properly. you've got a lot of things on the table, and that's great. I also like the fact that you've got insurance agents out there that are helping provide some guidance, even though they're not getting the business. It's just you're normalizing these folks and helping them conduct their business properly. So that's great info, Donnie. I really appreciate your time today, and I look forward to the next time that we have this conversation, because like you said at the top, there's an endless opportunity of challenges out there to help our industry continue to move forward. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Scott.
Now, next up is a segment I want to dedicate to education and the pipeline of technicians coming into the industry. This will not be a full segment for this intro podcast, but a colleague of mine, and I will call him my friend, Steve Ford, aka the Car Guy, and you can look him up online. He has a very dynamic background. He's been in media broadcasting, he's been in education, he worked for General Motors as an instructor, he was a technician. He worked as a college instructor, and he is very, very passionate about the automotive service industry and, more importantly, the youth coming into the world today. And he and I caught up in a conversation, and he had some very profound statistics that I want to share with you here, and just so that you can get some knowledge, and then I will bring him back into the conversation here in future episodes to expand on this. So have a listen.
A friend of mine from Minnesota, who's a ASE Education Alliance representative for that region, but this is a guy who places interns and helps relate, the schools to the local automotive communities across the state of Minnesota. And he and I were talking, and I said to him, a couple of friends of mine in the Los Angeles Unified School District are high school auto instructors, and they're top of the game. Belmont High School in downtown Los Angeles is one of the top programs in the region, and run by a bilingual instructor in a relatively poverty-stricken portion of the city of Los Angeles. And he has students that are superstars, and he's transformational. Another one is Joe Agruso at Van Nuys High School, where Robert Redford went to school, in the San Fernando Valley, Middle America, right? Now, this is not covering 50 states of representation, but here's my alarm. I'm talking to both those instructors, and they say there are vacancies for automotive instructors at 2 of the LAUSD high schools, and they are starting the semester with substitute teachers because they can't get teachers who are qualified and interested in the positions right now. So then you have to pull back wide and say, here's what I learned from Quentin Swan, a name you may have heard. He's out in your region. He's a person who used to work for the LA Unified School District as a high school automotive instructor, and then became one of those, CTE consultants who worked around the county helping CTE programs, career technical education. And here's the number that blew me away that he told me a couple of years back. He said, Steve, in 1985, when I first became a consultant, there were 100 high schools in the LAUSD, 100 high schools. Now, where he got that number, I don't doubt it, but it was just the number he remembered. And he said, back in 85, we had 85 high school auto programs in the LAUSD. Now, I think we have something like 9 million cars in LA County. I just want to throw that number out. I looked it up, and I'm recalling it's 6 to 8 million, 9 million, something. Beyond 6 or 7 million, I just was boggled when I thought, this is the county of Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles. I give you that number knowing it almost sounds irrelevant, except it's so astronomical when you consider the pipeline of 100 high schools having 85 auto programs back in 1985, 35 years ago, plus or minus, So the number today of the LAUSD high schools that have auto programs is 7. There's 7 programs of 100 high schools, if there's still even 100 high schools in the LAUSD. Of those 7 schools, only 5 are operating with auto instructors.
And that was from my great friend and colleague, Steve Ford, and look for more information coming from him in the near future. Up next, that brings us to the Industry Events Roundup. On September 10th, 2019, ASE held their first ever ADAS Roundtable in Detroit. The purpose was to gather information from stakeholders into the future requirements of certification or licensing for ADAS operations. Approximately 65 folks were in attendance from all segments of the industry, including OEMs, Tier 1 providers, educators, and service providers. Discussion was lively, and look for future interviews from session participants in future Torque Factor podcasts. BIMMers held their annual conference recently in San Diego, California, and to kick off the event on October 3rd, I had the good fortune to host a panel discussion featuring ADAS titled Becoming Service Ready. BMW experts were gathered in attendance, featuring Kevin Fitzpatrick of the Opus Group, Dirk Fuchs from ZF, and Nelson Vargas from Autologic. There was a lot of lively discussion during the hour and 45-minute session, and the event was recorded. So for more information, visit bimmers.org. Okay, Max, the Mobile Air Conditioning Society has their annual conference and trade show coming up in Nashville, Tennessee, February 19th through 22nd, 2020. For more info, visit macsw.org. The annual Vision High-Tech Training and Expo is going to be held on March 5th through the 8th in Overland Park, Kansas. More information can be found at visionkc.com. The TST Big Event, Technician Service Training, is coming up in Tarrytown, New York, March 21st, 2020. More information can be found at tstseminars.org. And ASA Northwest has the Automotive Training Expo coming up on March 27th through the 29th, 2020, in Seattle. And for more information, visit atetrainingexpo.com. That brings us to...
Hello, Newman.
The mailbag. Now that brings us to the end of the show, and we hope we're able to bring you some quality content and look forward to future episodes. And we're looking for your feedback, so if you have any questions or comments, please drop them in the mailbag. And please hit the subscribe button to receive notifications on future episodes. Thanks for joining us.